Next.
I'd like to pay tribute to the volunteers of the Coastguard service and to those who are frontline in Malin and Valentia and in Dublin. First of all, I would ask about the first draft of the Fisher report, and obviously the Department of Transport hired the consultancy firm and obviously believed them to be competent, and many members have talked about the report itself. But what I'd like to read from is the draft, page 32, 33, 34, 41, 45, and what it says about senior management. And I'd like to ask the Assistant Secretary, was he aware of it? And was he aware that all these quotes were taken out of the first draft, and that the final draft presented to the Minister excluded all these comments, and that the final draft only has one paragraph in relation to senior management, which is neutered and neutral. And I'll begin by saying this is a quote from the first draft of the Fisher report, which was not presented to the Minister. Very strong perception that the organisation lacks a sense of strategic direction and purpose. A common observation amongst both external and internal stakeholders was that this apparent lack of direction was due, in part, to the Director's time commitments to external issues other than to the state. There is a sense in middle management level that the organisation lacks strategic direction. It is unlikely in the unlikely event, one hopes, of a major maritime emergency, a somewhat torrid relationship between the Irish Coastguard and the Marine Survey Office is a significant cause of concern, since this might impact on successful resolution of the incident. There was further concerns that the Irish Coastguard Service does not appear to have a clearly defined role, and if it does not stick to it. The Irish Coastguard is perceived as being all things to all men. Thus, and this is from page 34, thus while Irish Coastguard provides a well-regarded search and rescue, Irish Coastguard as a whole is not regarded as well managed. With better management, many people consider that it could prove and provide more output, and with the same resources improve efficiency. And it goes on page 45, the relationship between the Director of the Irish Coastguard Service and the Marine Survey Office, which are clearly key components of an end-to-end maritime safety, borders on the destructive. At a personnel level, it is not acceptable to employ senior managers who are unable to cooperate closely. At a corporate level, more integration of the Irish Coastguard and the Marine Survey Office would deliver a more efficient end-to-end maritime service. There are some of the quotes that were in the first draft. The first draft, I think, was about 60 pages. There was a 19-page reply that went back to the consultants, which used the most bizarre terminology, Facebook chatter, and that some of the comments were, coffee and water fount chatter. So I'd like to know, Assistant Secretary, were you aware that all those comments were deleted from the first draft that was done by the consultants and were given to the Minister, and were taken out of the draft given to the Minister? And then, worryingly enough, we have the options. And 3 options were put into the first draft. 3, sorry.
Excuse me, sorry. It's just, I've been notified here, the electronic system, there's a phone interference. But there must be a phone somewhere, probably, maybe if everybody checked. It's not your phone, I'm not saying, but somebody's phone, because it's... All right. Okay, Senator.
Thanks. On the other end. In the first draft, it outlined 3 options: 3 centres, 2 centres, 1 centre, and it gave the costs and benefits of all of those, and yet, without, as I understand it, coming down on the side of any of those options, just listed a range of options. And what we have in the final draft, and seeing as we've seen all these comments about senior management deleted after a 19-page response by senior management to the first draft. We see that the final draft that went to the minister said, we recommend that the status quo 3-centre model is not retained. I can't see that in the draft that was the first draft, the original draft, that was entirely manipulated by senior management. And then we get to this issue, and this is the most disturbing. I mean, if it's not disturbing enough, Assistant Secretary, that the Minister gets a report that's entirely doctored by senior management, that's bad enough. But, you know, when it comes down to lives, then it gets serious. And what we have, and colleagues have outlined, the amount of reports that have been put forward that have tried to shut down Malin and Valentia. There was 1989 PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte and Touche in 2002 went to Dermot Ahern, and he knocked it back and said, no, we're retaining Malin and Valentia. The Fearon report, which was scrutinised in this committee room in 2008, we went through the same process again. He tried to shut down Malin and Valentia. And that report, and if you want to see the tapes, I'll give them to you, was entirely discredited inside in this room. Lie after lie after lie was put in that document and given to a minister. And here we have the same attempt by senior management to do the same thing again. Then we had Ahern and Associates, even though the Minister for Transport turned around and said, install the equipment in Malin and Valentia, order it now and install it. Here we are in 2012. And the equipment still hasn't been installed. There was another report, Ahern and Associates, 2010, again trying to delay the installation of the equipment. And the choice was given to staff. Do you want the buildings upgraded, or do you want the equipment installed? This was done in an email by Chris Reynolds to staff. All the staff said, install the equipment. The equipment is still sitting in Blanchardstown. And in the Fearon report in 2007, it stated quite clearly, and I'm sure you're aware, that the equipment in Malin and Valentia was subject to catastrophic failure at any moment. Motorola had issued a debt certificate on that equipment prior to 2007, and GE were ordered by a minister, democratically elected member of parliament, install the equipment as a matter of urgency. And where is that equipment today? It is sitting in Blanchardstown. Sitting in Blanchardstown. And equipment liable to catastrophic failure is down in Malin and Valentia. Now, in this report as well, and even in the rebuttal, in the Fisher report, it talks about the importance of Malin and Valentia to saving the lives of Spanish fishermen off our coast. And it talks about how Malin is the only Coastguard station in Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales, and I welcome my colleagues from the north here today, that all the staff can speak Spanish to the fishermen in distress. So important is this ability that the Royal Air Force call on Valentia time and time again to coordinate with Spanish fishermen in distress. Now, I note in Mr. Reynolds' rebuttal that he says it is maritime law that they should have an English speaker on board. A lot of good to a Spanish trawler 200 miles off the Fastnet, and he doesn't have an English speaker on board. Would we quote him chapter and verse and say, sorry, we don't have any Spanish speakers here? And in the rebuttal, he says that this doesn't really have any currency, Mr. Reynolds. That's what you said. It really doesn't count. I believe lives count. I believe the Spanish fishermen are deserving of being saved, and that the fact that we have this unique facility in Valentia that can coordinate rescues between our Coast Guard service helicopters, the RAF helicopters, and those Spanish trawlers in distress is very important, because lives depend on it. And what I can't understand is why here we are, 4 years on, and the equipment that you told us was subject to catastrophic failure, and you said, Minister, we must close down Malin and Valentia immediately. We have to put in this equipment in Dublin, and we must close down those other stations. That 4 years later, it is still sitting in boxes in Blanchardstown. And I would contend that, you know, it's impossible to understand how somebody who is the head of a Coast Guard service that is dedicated to saving lives, knowing that that equipment is subject to such catastrophic failure, hasn't installed it. Mr. Reynolds, I don't think you're fit to hold the office that you are in charge of, considering that you are putting lives at risk on an hourly basis. Now, Mr. Mullen, I'd like to hear, were you aware of Fisher 1 and all the drafts and all the criticism of senior management, and did you ask that it be taken out? And did you ask that the final report, which had all this criticism done by a consultant hired by you, be handed to the Minister?
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.